Have you ever felt so small, so utterly humiliated that you thought you might just disappear? Valentina Cruz knew that feeling all too well when her powerful ex-husband, Nathan Cross, tried to publicly shame her at a lavish party, turning her into the butt of a cruel joke. She was ready for the floor to swallow her whole. But in that moment of ultimate despair, an unexpected hand reached out. It wasn't just anyone. It was Julian Devereaux, the city's most enigmatic and respected billionaire. And what he did next didn't just save her night. It shattered everyone's expectations and changed her life forever. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a gallery consignment form and an overdue electricity bill. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that felt heavy with the price of its own existence. Engraved in elegant gold script were the words, "The Cross Corporation Annual Gala." Below that, in a smaller, sharper font, "Celebrating a Decade of Dominance." Valentina Cruz ran a thumb over her ex-husband's name, embossed with a self-important flourish. Nathan Cross, CEO. A wave of cold, sharp nausea washed over her, as predictable as the tide. For 3 years, she had meticulously scrubbed her life clean of him. She'd moved to a cramped but sunny walk-up in the East Village, a world away from the sterile, glass-walled penthouse on Park Avenue that had been her gilded cage. She'd traded haute couture for paint-splattered jeans and poured every ounce of her savings and her soul into her art. Her studio, which doubled as her living room and kitchen, was her sanctuary, filled with the scent of turpentine and the silent testament of canvases leaning against every wall. Her paintings were her voice, the one Nathan had systematically silenced. They were bold, chaotic expressions of color and emotion, abstracts that captured the jagged edges of memory and the fluid hope of healing. Her best friend and gallery agent, Sofia Ramirez, called them symphonies of survival. Valentina just called them the truth. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" Sofia asked that afternoon, perched on a wobbly stool amidst the creative chaos of the studio. She held the invitation between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Of course not," Valentina replied instantly, dabbing a streak of fiery cadmium red onto a massive canvas. But her hand wasn't quite steady. The lie was a flimsy shield against a complicated, churning vortex of emotion. "Good, because the only reason he'd invite you is to perform some sort of public exorcism of the starter wife. He needs to show everyone how much better off he is without you. Don't give him the satisfaction." Sofia was right. That was Nathan's playbook. He was a master of subtle psychological warfare, of chipping away at your confidence with a dismissive glance, a backhanded compliment, a carefully chosen word designed to remind you of your inadequacy. During their 5-year marriage, he had curated her life, her friends, her opinions, until she was little more than a beautiful, silent accessory reflecting his own success. He'd called her artistic ambitions a cute little hobby, encouraging her to paint serene, marketable landscapes instead of the turbulent abstracts that poured from her soul. He'd isolated her so skillfully that by the time she found the courage to leave, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The divorce had been brutal. His corporate lawyers had painted her as a volatile, unstable gold digger, and in the end she'd walked away with just enough to start over, relinquishing all claims to his burgeoning empire just to be free. Freedom, she had discovered, was terrifying. It was the silence of an empty apartment, the gnawing anxiety of unpaid bills, and the daunting, exhilarating terror of a blank canvas. For 3 years she had fought for this new life. She had bartended to pay rent, survived on ramen and coffee, and poured every waking moment into her art. And slowly, painstakingly, she was making a name for herself. A few group shows, a small but glowing review in an art blog, the unwavering support of Sofia. It was a foundation, fragile but real. So why did the invitation feel like a summons? That night, alone in her apartment, the city lights painting dancing shadows on her walls, she couldn't escape the pull of the past. It wasn't about Nathan, she told herself. It wasn't about wanting him back or caring what he thought. It was about the woman he had tried to erase. The Valentina who had dreams before him, the one who loved the smell of oil paint more than the scent of expensive perfume. He had tried to shame her in private for years. The thought of him doing it in public, in front of the world he now commanded, was a cold knot of dread in her stomach. But what if she didn't let him? What if she walked into that ballroom not as Nathan Cross's discarded ex-wife, but as Valentina Cruz, the artist? What if she faced the ghost of her past, not to fight it, but to show herself that it no longer had any power over her? The idea was terrifying. It felt like walking willingly into a lion's den, armed with nothing but a paintbrush. She looked at the canvas she'd been working on, the vibrant slash of red like a defiant wound. For years she had painted her pain, her anger, her recovery. It was all there, raw and honest. But she had done it from the safety of her studio. She had been healing in the shadows. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to step into the light. Not for Nathan, not for the glittering, judgmental crowd that would be there, but for the woman staring back at her in the faint reflection of the window. A woman smeared with paint and exhaustion, but a woman who was, finally, undeniably her own. The decision settled not with a crash, but with a quiet, steely resolve. She would go. She would wear her scars not as a mark of shame, but as a testament to the battles she had won. The lobby of the St. Regis Hotel was a symphony of hushed opulence. Marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Valentina felt a pang of a past life, a phantom limb ache for a comfort she had once known and now reviled. She had chosen her armor carefully, a simple floor-length gown of deep emerald silk. It was elegant but understated, a stark contrast to the diamond-encrusted brand-name confections worn by the other women gliding past her. Her only jewelry was a pair of silver earrings she'd made herself, shaped like abstract painters' palettes. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to flee back to the messy, paint-stained safety of her apartment. But she forced her feet forward, handed her coat to a waiting attendant, and walked toward the grand ballroom. The room was breathtaking, a cavern of gold and light with panoramic views of the glittering Manhattan skyline. It was a world she had once belonged to, yet she had never felt more like an intruder. Heads turned as she entered. Whispers followed her like a trail of smoke, the discreet murmurings of New York's elite. "Is that? I thought she'd moved to Oregon or something. My God, what is she doing here?" She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on a point just above their heads, and made her way to the bar. A glass of champagne felt less like a celebration and more like a necessity, its cold bite a welcome distraction from the tightening in her chest. And then she saw him. Nathan Cross stood at the center of the room, a king in his court. He was exactly as she remembered, yet somehow more polished, more formidable. His custom-tailored suit fit him like a second skin, his dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile, that charming, predatory smile, was firmly in place. He was holding court, surrounded by a sycophantic circle of business titans and socialites, all hanging on his every word. Beside him was a young woman, impossibly beautiful and glowing with the unshakable confidence of youth and wealth. Isabella Vance. Valentina knew of her from the society pages. She was the daughter of a real estate tycoon, 24 years old, and Nathan's very public new partner. They made a perfect picture, the powerful CEO and his beautiful pedigreed ingénue. For a moment, Valentina's carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. This was the woman who had replaced her, the woman who fit seamlessly into the life that had nearly suffocated her. She felt a bizarre mix of pity and envy. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Nathan's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and calculating passed through his gaze. He excused himself from his circle and began to walk toward her, Isabella in tow. The crowd parted for him as if he were Moses, and this was his personal Red Sea. "Valentina," he said, his voice smooth and laced with a condescending warmth that set her teeth on edge. "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you." "Nathan," she replied, her voice impressively steady. "You sent the invitation? Or did you just have your assistant send one to everyone who ever had the misfortune of being in your address book?" A faint muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign that her barb had landed. "Always so dramatic," he chuckled, turning to his partner. "Isabella, my love, this is Valentina, my former wife." He said the word wife as if it were a distasteful object he'd found on the sole of his shoe. Isabella gave her a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "It's so lovely to finally meet you. Nathan has told me so little about you." It was a perfectly delivered line, meant to diminish her, to render her a footnote in his grand narrative. "He was never one for details," Valentina said, her eyes locked on Nathan's. "He prefers broad strokes, easier to paint over the parts you don't like." The air crackled with unspoken history. Nathan's smile tightened. He placed a possessive hand on Isabella's back, a gesture of ownership Valentina knew all too well. "Well, we're thrilled you could come. It's a big night. 10 years. It's hard to believe how far the company has come since the early days." The implication was clear. Since the time when she was by his side, hosting small dinner parties and proofreading his business plans late into the night. He was rewriting history, casting her as a relic of his humble beginnings, a past he had successfully transcended. It was a classic Nathan move, death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered with a charming smile. He was a ghost at this feast, and he was determined to make her one too. She could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on them, could sense their morbid curiosity. She was the drama, the unexpected sideshow at Nathan's triumphant celebration. She took a slow sip of her champagne, the bubbles fizzing on her tongue, and met his cold, triumphant gaze. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not tonight. The evening wore on, a slow-motion parade of forced smiles and meaningless conversations. Valentina felt like a foreigner navigating a hostile land, the language of which she barely remembered. She exchanged pleasantries with people who looked right through her, their eyes scanning the room for someone more important. She was an anomaly, a ghost from a past everyone, especially Nathan, wanted to forget. She found a quiet corner near the towering windows, nursing her second glass of champagne and watching the city lights blur into a watercolor painting below. The clinking of a fork against a glass cut through the din. A hush fell over the ballroom as Nathan strode to the small stage at the front of the room, a microphone in hand. The spotlight followed him, casting him in an angelic glow that was grotesquely at odds with the man she knew. "Friends, colleagues, partners," he began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate a decade of the Cross Corporation." He launched into a well-rehearsed speech, a tapestry of ambition, success, and carefully curated humility. He talked about the company's growth, the market shares they'd conquered, the deals they'd closed. It was a masterclass in self-aggrandizement disguised as corporate gratitude. Valentina listened, a sense of detached unreality washing over her. She had heard versions of this speech countless times, whispered to her in the dark as he laid out his plans for world domination. But then the tone shifted. A smirk played on his lips as he leaned closer to the microphone. "You know, when I started this company from my spare bedroom, I had nothing but a dream and a laptop that was older than some of the people in this room," he said, drawing a ripple of polite laughter. "I had to make sacrifices. We all do, on the road to success. You have to be willing to shed the things that hold you back, the things that can't keep up with your vision. Valentina's blood ran cold. She knew where this was going. "It's like a first car," he continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, a showman working his audience. "You're grateful for it. It gets you from point A to point B when you're just starting out. It's reliable, it's familiar. But you can't drive that old clunker to the Monaco Grand Prix. At some point you have to upgrade. You have to invest in something sleek, powerful, and built for the life you have now, not the one you left behind." The room was filled with chuckles and knowing nods. It was a clever, sanitized metaphor, but to Valentina it was a public stoning. He was talking about her. She was the old clunker, the starter car, the thing he had shed to achieve greatness. She could feel the heat of 100 gazes turning toward her, some with pity, most with a kind of cruel amusement. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The ballroom suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in. This was his checkmate. He hadn't just ignored her or been rude to her. He had woven her into his success story as a cautionary tale, a punchline. He had taken their shared history, their marriage, and twisted it into an anecdote to amuse his wealthy friends and colleagues. He was shaming her, publicly and profoundly, in a way that left her with no recourse. To react would be to prove his point, that she was overly emotional, unstable. To stay silent was to accept the humiliation. Her vision tunneled. The glittering lights, the smiling faces, the skyline outside, it all blurred into a meaningless, painful haze. She had been a fool to come. She had thought she could face him, but she had underestimated his cruelty, his talent for public spectacle. All she wanted was to disappear, to run from this room and never look back. She placed her champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray with a trembling hand and turned to leave, her movements stiff and robotic. She just had to make it to the door, just a few more steps through this gauntlet of staring eyes. But as she took her first step toward the exit, a low, calm voice spoke from just behind her. "Don't give him the satisfaction of seeing you run." The voice was quiet, but carried an undeniable authority. It cut through the fog of her panic. She stopped, her back still to the room, and turned her head slightly. Standing beside her was a man she didn't know. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that was even finer than Nathan's, if such a thing were possible. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, dark hair with distinguished hints of silver at the temples, and a face that was more compelling than handsome. There was a stillness about him, a powerful, self-contained energy that seemed to create its own pocket of calm in the chaotic room. He wasn't looking at her, but at the stage where Nathan was wrapping up his speech to a round of enthusiastic applause. The man's expression was unreadable, but there was a distinct lack of admiration in his eyes. Who are you?" Valentina whispered, her voice hoarse. He finally turned his gaze to her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, and they held a surprising warmth, an empathy that she hadn't encountered in years. "My name is Julian Devereux," he said simply, "and I believe your ex-husband is a contemptible ass." The name registered with a jolt, cutting through Valentina's humiliation. Julian Devereux. Even in her art-focused, hermetically sealed world, she knew that name. Devereux was a legend in the financial world, a rival to men like Nathan Cross, but of a different breed entirely. He was old money, but had built a New Age empire through shrewd ethical investments in renewable energy and technology. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and known more for his massive philanthropic endeavors than for ostentatious displays of wealth. He was everything Nathan pretended to be: respected, genuinely powerful, and utterly self-assured. Nathan was still basking in the applause, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. The spotlight was on him, but Valentina felt as though a different kind of light, a protective one, had just been cast over her. "He's not wrong," she managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "About me, I mean. I couldn't keep up." It was an old, familiar script, one Nathan had drilled into her for years. Julian Devereux looked at her, truly looked at her, and his gaze was so direct it felt like he was seeing past the emerald dress and the trembling facade, right into the core of her. "On the contrary, Ms. Cruz," he said, his voice still low and steady. "From what I've seen, it looks very much like he was the one who couldn't keep up with you." Valentina stared at him, bewildered. "What do you mean? You don't even know me?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I know your work. I saw your piece, Phoenix, at the Agora Gallery group show last spring. It was extraordinary, the most compelling thing in the entire exhibition." Her breath caught in her throat. He knew her art, not as Nathan Cross's ex-wife, but as Valentina Cruz, the artist. He had seen a piece that was deeply personal, a raw, explosive canvas of reds, oranges and blacks that depicted her struggle to rise from the ashes of her marriage. For a stranger, especially a man of his stature, to not only have seen it, but to have remembered it and understood it, it was a validation so profound it almost brought her to tears. You saw that? I make it a point to follow emerging artists. Your use of color and texture is remarkable. It's visceral, honest." He paused, his gaze flicking back toward Nathan, who was now laughing boisterously with a group of investors. "It's a language men like him will never understand. They only deal in currency and control." In that moment, Julian Devereux gave her back a piece of herself that Nathan had spent years trying to steal. He saw her value, not as an accessory or a reflection of a man's success, but as a creator in her own right. He offered her his arm. "Allow me to escort you somewhere less toxic. The terrace, perhaps." Nodding, unable to form words, she placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his suit was cool and smooth beneath her trembling fingers. As he guided her through the throng, the whispers and stares seemed to bounce off an invisible shield he carried. His presence was a quiet rebuke to the entire room. People parted for him not with the fawning deference they showed Nathan, but with a palpable sense of respect. They stepped out onto a wide, stone terrace. The cool night air was a welcome shock to her system, clearing her head. The roar of the city below was a distant, comforting hum. "Thank you," she said, finally finding her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "No one should have to endure that kind of public humiliation," he said, leaning against the balustrade and looking out at the city. It was a cowardly, pathetic display of insecurity. "It was classic Nathan," she said with a humorless laugh. "He's a bully. He always has been. I was just foolish enough to think I was immune now." "Immunity isn't built by avoidance," Julian said, turning to face her. "It's built by exposure and by realizing that the poison they're spewing has no power over you unless you allow it to." They stood in a comfortable silence for a few moments, two strangers sharing an unexpected moment of connection high above the city. Valentina felt the frantic, panicked energy inside her begin to subside, replaced by a tentative calm. He hadn't swooped in to save a damsel in distress. He had simply stood beside her and reminded her that she was not the person Nathan had tried to paint her as. He had seen her strength, her talent, even when she had forgotten it herself. He was an unexpected guardian, not of her body, but of her spirit, and for the first time all night, she felt like she could breathe again. They stayed on the terrace, away from the prying eyes and suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. The conversation flowed easily, surprisingly so. Julian asked her about her artistic process, her inspirations, the meaning behind the colors she chose. He listened with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply flattering. It was a stark contrast to Nathan, who would nod along to her explanations about her work, his eyes glazed over with boredom, before changing the subject back to himself. Valentina, in turn, found herself asking him about his work, not the financial intricacies, but the philanthropic side. He spoke passionately about his foundation's work in funding arts education in underserved communities and creating sustainable housing. He spoke of power not as a tool for domination, but as a resource for creating change. It was a philosophy so alien to the world she had shared with Nathan that it felt like it belonged to another universe. "He resents you because you left," Julian said, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the Brooklyn Bridge. "Men like him cannot comprehend being the one who is left. It fundamentally contradicts their narrative of being the conqueror, the one who does the discarding." "I wasn't a conqueror," Valentina said softly. "I was a refugee. I just ran." "You escaped," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. Running is chaos. Escaping is a strategy. It requires strength and a belief that there is something better on the other side." His words reframed her entire past. She had always seen her departure as an act of desperation, of weakness. He saw it as an act of strength. The party began to wind down. Muted sounds of music and laughter drifted out onto the terrace. Valentina knew she should leave, but she was reluctant to end the conversation, to step out from under the quiet protection of his presence. "I should go," she said finally. "I have an early start at the studio tomorrow." "Of course," Julian said. "Will you allow me to see you home? I can't imagine you're eager to brave the gauntlet in there alone." She hesitated for only a second before accepting. As they walked back through the now thinning crowd, Nathan spotted them. He was standing near the exit with Isabella, who looked bored and tired. His eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Valentina on the arm of his quiet, formidable rival. His face, which had been flush with triumph an hour ago, was now a mask of controlled fury. It was clear this was a development he had not anticipated. He gave them a curt, dismissive nod as they passed, a silent acknowledgement of a battle he didn't even know was being waged. Julian's car, a sleek, dark Audi, was waiting for them. It was luxurious, but, like its owner, tastefully understated. The drive to her East Village apartment was quiet, the city slipping past the windows in a blur of neon and shadow. "Thank you again for tonight," Valentina said as the car pulled up in front of her modest building. "You were incredibly kind." "Kindness is an undervalued commodity, Miss Cruz," he replied, his voice a low murmur in the quiet car. "And please, call me Julian." "Valentina." He didn't move to get out of the car, but instead turned slightly in his seat to face her. "Valentina, I wasn't just making conversation on the terrace. I've been following your work for some time. I'm on the board of the new Metropolitan Arts Foundation, and we're in the final planning stages of our new headquarters downtown. We're looking to commission a signature piece for the main atrium." Valentina's heart skipped a beat. This was the kind of commission artists dreamed of, the kind that could change a career overnight. "I've been quietly championing your work to the rest of the board," Julian continued. "I'd like to arrange a formal meeting for you to present a proposal, if you're interested." Interested? It was like asking a drowning person if they were interested in a life raft. A torrent of emotions washed over her. Disbelief, hope, and a sudden, sharp suspicion. Was this pity? Was he offering her this because of what happened with Nathan? As if reading her mind, he said, "This has nothing to do with tonight. I had my assistant flag your work 6 months ago. Nathan's boorish behavior simply provided me with an opportunity to introduce myself." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. This wasn't charity. It was a genuine opportunity, one born of her own merit, her own talent. It was a different kind of power, not the loud, domineering power of Nathan Cross, but the quiet, authentic power that comes from being seen and valued for who you are. She looked from her humble, slightly run-down apartment building to the elegant man sitting beside her in his expensive car. They were from two different worlds, yet tonight he had crossed the chasm between them and met her on her own ground. "I'm interested," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. "I'm very interested." A genuine smile finally broke through his reserved demeanor, lighting up his eyes. "Good. My office will be in touch tomorrow." He got out of the car and walked her to her door, waiting until she was safely inside before returning to his car. As Valentina climbed the 5 flights of stairs to her apartment, she felt lighter than she had in years. The shame and humiliation of Nathan's attack were still there, but they were now overshadowed by a brilliant, blazing spark of hope. She had walked into that party a ghost, but she was walking out a contender. The email from Julian Devereux's office arrived at 9:02 a.m. the next morning. It was concise, professional, and sent a jolt of adrenaline through Valentina's system, more potent than any double espresso. A meeting was set for Thursday to discuss the commission for the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. Valentina spent the next 2 days in a creative frenzy. She barely ate or slept, fueled by a relentless, joyful energy she hadn't felt in years. She sketched, she painted studies, she filled notebooks with ideas for the atrium piece. She envisioned something monumental, a soaring abstract that would capture the resilience of the human spirit and the chaotic beauty of the city. It would be her masterpiece, the culmination of every struggle, every tear, every small victory. This wasn't just a commission, it was a resurrection. The meeting took place in Julian's office, a serene, light-filled space on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper. Unlike Nathan's ostentatious mahogany and leather power den, Julian's office was a testament to minimalist elegance, decorated with an impeccable collection of modern art. A stunning Helen Frankenthaler canvas dominated one wall. Valentina, armed with her portfolio and a detailed proposal, was nervous but resolute. Julian was there, along with 2 other board members, a distinguished older woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Isabella, she prayed, and a sharp younger man named David Chen. She spoke for an hour, walking them through her vision, her voice gaining confidence as she lost herself in her passion. She talked about her inspiration, her process, the very soul she intended to pour into the work. When she finished, the room was silent. Eleanor Vance was the first to speak. "Ms. Cruz," she said, her voice warm, "that was one of the most compelling artistic proposals I have ever heard." The commission was hers. They spent another hour hammering out the details of the contract. It was a life-changing amount of money, enough to give her a security she had never known, even when married to Nathan. But it was the validation, the belief in her talent, that truly overwhelmed her. After the board members left, Julian asked her to stay. He poured them both a glass of water and sat across from her, his expression more serious than she had seen it before. "There's something else, Valentina," he began, his tone shifting. "My interest in you and in Nathan isn't purely artistic or philanthropic." A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. "I've been aware of Nathan's questionable business practices for some time," he said carefully. "He's ruthless, which is one thing, but he's also reckless. He cuts corners, he leverages his company in dangerous ways, and I have strong reason to believe he is engaged in insider trading and market manipulation. He's built an empire on a foundation of sand, and when it collapses, a lot of innocent people are going to be hurt." Valentina listened, stunned. She knew Nathan was a bully and a narcissist, but she had never considered the full extent of his amorality. She'd been too consumed with her own survival. "For the past year," Julian continued, "I've had a team of forensic accountants quietly looking into his company's financials. We're building a case which we intend to hand over to the SEC. What he did to you at that party was reprehensible, but it also confirmed something for me. His arrogance has made him sloppy. He believes he's untouchable." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "I am telling you this because my fight with him is about to become more public, and by accepting this very high-profile commission, you will be inadvertently drawn into it. He will see you as aligning with me, his rival. He will not react well." The cold reality of his words hit her. She had just escaped one war with Nathan. Now she was on the verge of being drafted into another. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you trying to warn me off?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm being transparent, and I'm about to make a proposition that may sound unorthodox, but it is, I believe, the best way to protect you and to give you the platform you deserve, free from his shadow." He paused, choosing his words with care. "There is a major charity auction next month. The heart of the city gala. It's the biggest event of the fall season. The entire New York establishment will be there, including Nathan. I want you to attend as my guest. That part wasn't so strange, but then he laid out the rest of his plan. Nathan's power is built on perception and narrative. He has successfully painted you as the discarded, unstable, starter wife. We need to shatter that narrative, so completely and publicly that he can never use it against you again. When he sees us there, he will inevitably try to confront you, to assert his dominance. And when he does, I will introduce you. He held her gaze. As my fiancée. Valentina stared at him, speechless. A fake engagement. It was something out of a movie, not real life. It's a gambit, he admitted. A strategic move. It immediately repositions you not as his victim, but as my equal. It grants you a level of social armor that he cannot penetrate. It will infuriate him, and a furious man makes mistakes. But I will not ask it of you if you're not comfortable. It is a lot to ask. Her mind reeled. It was insane, it was audacious, and it was brilliant. For years, Nathan had controlled the story, her story. He'd defined her, labeled her, and almost destroyed her. Julian was offering her a chance to snatch the pen from his hand and write her own ending. It wasn't about love or romance. It was a strategic alliance, a partnership forged in the fire of a common enemy. It was about power, not his, not Nathan's, but her own. She thought of the years of quiet humiliation, the casual cruelty, the slow erosion of her soul. She thought of him on that stage, turning her pain into a punchline. A slow, cold anger, as potent as any artistic inspiration, rose within her. She looked at Julian, at this quiet, powerful man who had seen her when she was invisible. He wasn't offering to save her. He was offering her a weapon to save herself. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'll do it." The grand ballroom at Cipriani was a sea of glittering jewels and black tie suits. The heart of the city gala was the social apex of the fall season, and the air buzzed with the low hum of power and influence. Valentina felt surprisingly calm as she entered on Julian's arm. This time she wasn't an intruder or a ghost. She was a guest of honor, in a way. Her armor tonight was a gown of midnight blue that shimmered with every step, a loan from a designer Julian knew. But her real armor was the man beside her and the audacious plan they were about to execute. They made their way through the room, and the reaction was immediate and profound. Heads turned, conversations paused. Julian Devereux's presence at such an event was rare enough, but his arriving with a woman no one in this circle recognized at first, was an unprecedented event. Whispers followed them, but this time they were not of pity, but of frantic, curious speculation. Valentina spotted Nathan across the room almost immediately. He was standing with Isabella and another couple, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His back was to them initially, but he seemed to feel the shift in the room's atmosphere. He turned, and his eyes found them. The whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips. His easy, confident smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He saw Valentina, looking more radiant and confident than he had ever seen her, and he saw her on the arm of the one man in the city he could neither intimidate nor buy. His eyes narrowed, the color draining from his face, leaving behind a mottled, dangerous anger. The first part of the gambit was a success. They had his attention. For the next hour they played their parts to perfection. Julian introduced Valentina to a stream of influential people. Gallery owners, museum curators, art collectors, city council members. He didn't introduce her as an artist he was patronizing, but as a brilliant contemporary he admired. "Valentina Cruz," he would say, his voice filled with pride. "Her work is going to redefine the New York art scene." She spoke about her upcoming commission for the foundation, and the respect she was shown was immediate and genuine. She wasn't Nathan Cross's ex-wife anymore. She was Valentina Cruz, the artist commissioned by the legendary Julian Devereux. She was, in this world of perception and status, somebody. And with every handshake, every engaging conversation, she felt herself growing into this new role, a role that was, in fact, her true self all along. They were examining a piece of art up for auction when Nathan finally made his move. He approached them alone, having shed Isabella like an unneeded accessory. His face was a thunderous mask, his earlier charm completely gone, replaced by a raw, possessive fury. "Devereaux," he said, his voice a low growl. "I didn't realize you were slumming it with my leftovers." The insult was crude, designed to provoke, to drag them down to his level. Valentina flinched, but Julian's hand rested gently on the small of her back, a silent, steadying anchor. Julian turned to face him, his expression one of complete, unruffled calm. He looked Nathan up and down as if he were a mildly interesting but ultimately insignificant insect. "Cross," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm surprised you have time to bother my fiancée." The word hung in the air, electric and resounding. Fiancée. Valentina held her breath, watching Nathan's face. For a split second, there was utter confusion. Then, his eyes darted from Julian's calm, implacable face to hers. He was searching for a tell, a sign that this was a joke. He found none. All he saw was the woman he thought he had broken, standing beside a man far more powerful than him, looking serene and untouchable. The carefully constructed world of Nathan Cross shattered in that instant. His entire narrative of the pathetic starter wife, of his own triumphant ascendance, was annihilated by a single word. Valentina wasn't his leftover. She was the chosen partner of his greatest rival. It was a social and psychological defeat so total, so public, that he had no defense against it. The color flooded back into his face in a wave of crimson rage, his fists clenched at his sides. The people nearby, sensing the monumental drama unfolding, had fallen silent, their eyes wide. "You're lying," Nathan hissed, the words stumbling out. Julian simply raised an eyebrow. He didn't need to argue or defend. His quiet confidence was more damning than any protestation. He then did something that sealed Nathan's fate. He turned his back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and guided Valentina away toward the auction stage. It was checkmate. In the brutal, high-stakes chess game of New York society, Julian Devereaux had just toppled the king with a single, devastating move. And Valentina was not the pawn. She was the queen. The fallout from the heart of the city gala was swift and spectacular. The city's gossip columns exploded with the news. The reclusive billionaire Julian Devereaux was engaged to the mysterious artist Valentina Cruz. The story was intoxicating, a tale of rivalry, art, and unexpected romance. Overnight, Valentina was transformed. She was no longer a footnote in Nathan's story. She was the headline of her own. Nathan, for his part, became a public spectacle of his own making. Fueled by rage and humiliation, he made a series of disastrously aggressive business moves, trying to claw back his perceived dominance. His arrogance, as Julian had predicted, made him sloppy. A week after the gala, the SEC announced a formal investigation into the Cross Corporation, citing anonymous but credible tips regarding market manipulation. Nathan's empire, built on a foundation of sand, began to crumble. Valentina watched it all from the quiet sanctity of her studio, which was soon to be upgraded to a much larger space she'd leased with the advance from her commission. The news of Nathan's downfall brought her not joy, but a sense of profound and somber closure. She had not wished for his destruction, only for her own peace. Her life, in contrast, was blossoming. The publicity from the engagement and the Foundation Commission had thrown a brilliant spotlight on her work. Galleries that had ignored her calls a month ago were now clamoring for a meeting. A prestigious art magazine requested a feature. Her days were a whirlwind of painting, meetings, and interviews. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Her relationship with Julian evolved as well. The fake engagement had forged a bond of deep trust and mutual respect between them. They spent evenings together, sometimes talking for hours about art, philosophy, and their disparate but surprisingly similar life experiences. He was her confidant, her mentor, and her fiercest champion. He celebrated her successes with a quiet, genuine pride that was a world away from Nathan's possessive praise. One evening they were standing in her new studio, a massive, light-drenched loft in Chelsea. Her commissioned piece for the foundation, a triptych of breathtaking scale and emotional depth, was nearly complete. "Are we ever going to tell people the truth?" Valentina asked, her voice soft as she looked at the swirling colors on the canvas. "We can end the arrangement whenever you wish," Julian said, his gaze on her, not the painting. "It has served its purpose. You don't need my protection anymore." She turned to face him. In the fading light of the setting sun, his sharp features were softened. She saw not the powerful billionaire or the strategic ally, but the man, kind, intelligent, and unexpectedly vulnerable. "Maybe it's no longer just an arrangement," she said, the admission surprising them both. Over the past few weeks, their strategic alliance had been colored with something warmer, something more real. The shared laughter, the easy silences, the way his eyes lit up when she talked about her work. It had all woven itself into a new kind of tapestry. He took a step closer, his grey eyes searching hers. "Valentina," he said, her name a quiet question. She didn't need a grand romantic declaration. She had lived through that kind of performance art with Nathan. What she had with Julian was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. It was a partnership built not on power imbalance, but on the profound, restorative strength of being truly seen. She reached out and took his hand. "Let's just see what happens." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the kind she was beginning to realize was reserved just for her. "I would like that very much." The story didn't end with a wedding or a promise of a fairy tale. It ended in that quiet moment in the studio, with the scent of oil paint in the air and the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. Valentina Cruz stood before her masterpiece, a woman reforged in fire, her hand held by a man who had not saved her, but had had the wisdom to let her save herself. She was not a queen on a chessboard or an empress on a throne. She was an artist, the sole and undisputed master of her own canvas, and her future was a brilliant, unpainted landscape waiting for her next bold stroke. And that's the incredible story of Valentina's journey from being a forgotten past to an undeniable future. It's a powerful reminder that our narratives are our own to write, and sometimes the greatest strength is found in the quiet dignity of reclaiming your own story. If you were moved by Valentina's fight for her identity and her unexpected alliance with Julian, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story of betrayal, redemption, and ultimate triumph. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Who was your favorite character and why? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.